just want to backtrack. I just want to backtrack to Zechariah 14:20, and it says, "In that day there shall be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots in the house shall be like the bowls of the altar." And so y'all did a good job in your answers, recognizing that you know, even the common things will be holy, but it's also it's to the level of holiness that they can be used for worship to God, because um if you look at Exodus if you look at Exodus 39:30, it says, "And they made the plate of the holy crown of pure gold, and wrote upon it in a writing like to the engravings of a signet, holiness to the Lord. And they tied it, and they tied unto it a lace of blue, and fastened it upon the high upon the mount mitre, as the Lord commanded Moses." So the mitre is what they tied to the forehead of the high priest. So the words that were displayed on the forehead of the high priest what are written on the equipment of the horses and on our common drinking cups. So that's the difference between that's the two kingdoms of the Mosaic law and the Christ millennial kingdom. So I thought that was pretty interesting that they wrote what was on the foreheads of the high priest on the bells of the horses and the cups. So that just kind of made that connection. I just wanted to point that out to you. Still didn't bring it up last week, but we'll go to Matthew 24, and this has been a a difficult week for me to prepare this, because Matthew 24 is so subject to interpretation, and and uh and it's really not clear, um and there's so much debate over what's going on, so it's difficult for me to speak on it. But I'm just going to speak on what the way I perceive it, because it'd be too much to talk about all the ways that everybody perceives it, but or interprets it. But we'll just start off. It says in Matthew 24, and Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. So they're walking out of the temple, and the backstory to this is Jesus has just ridden into Jerusalem, and he's basically declared himself the Messiah, because he's being greeted uh, by the palm tree and the branches, and he rides in, and everyone says that uh, he declares him the son of David. Um, and then he goes in and clears out the temple, and he berates he basically shows up to the temple where made him they should have said, "This is your temple, welcome, Messiah." And what they did was the religious leaders attempted to entrap him by asking him questions, and then so he so then he berates the scribes and the Pharisees, and he's pretty much he's pretty angry at this point, I think, because he went in to claim his kingdom, and he was rejected, and now he's walking out of the city, and his disciples are saying, "Look at this great temple," and he is the temple, and nobody's recognizing it, and I think at this point he just says, he says this in this state of mind where he's just been where the temple, which is his, has been rejected, and everyone's glorifying the temple and rejecting him. He says, "And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." And and so I think that's just his judgment on that how he was treated when he arrived. And so and then it says, as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, and this Mount of Olives, remember in Zechariah, this is where Christ is going to come to deliver Jerusalem from the from the armies of the Antichrist. And I'm sure Christ has read Zechariah, so he knows this. That might be one of the reasons he has this affinity for the Mount of Olives. So he says, and as they sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us." And they asked a series of questions. They said, "Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" So, so, what should so they asked, "What shall be the sign of their coming? When shall and then or when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world?" So, if you read commentaries from those with the pre-tribulation point of view, they'll say this is three questions, and because you can't have the sign of thy coming and the end of the world be in the same question and still be a pre-tribulation person. So they'll say, what shall be, so they'll break up that one question into two questions, and they'll say it's three questions. But if you're more of a pre-wrath or post-trib interpretation, that's two questions. Um, so then Jesus goes to answer the questions, and it's interesting that um, how he starts off. He says, "Take heed that no man deceive you." So this whole deception is seems to be the theme of the tribulation, and so it's and that's all due to the Antichrist program, because he's going to be appealing to people, and he's going to be deceptive, and he's going to be there's going to be a lot of people who think he is Christ. And that's what and especially Jews who may think he's their Messiah. So it says, "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many." And so the Antichrist will deceive many Jews and just Gentiles. "And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. All these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet come." And this is this I think this is a warning of the church age will have much war and much desolation, but not. It's kind of a warning to not be excited and think that the world is coming to an end every time a, a grievous war comes through. But it says, "For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places." And this verse 7, you could make it interpreted as a continuation of what we are not to expect, that that we are to be able to witness prior to the tribulation, but the tribulation is still not here. Or you can interpret it as these are the beginnings of the first week of Daniel, because all these events are encompassed in the first four seals of Revelation, which most people interpret the seals are all encompassed within the final week of Daniel, the 7 years, and the first 3.5 years are likely encompassing these first four seals. So the four seals are like a conquering a conquering horse. It's the war, a red horse, death, plague, so black and pale. So all these things, a much war, much conquering going on, much plague and death from war. And these are the things that you see here. For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famine and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. So this could be an answer to his the signs of what is coming. So the answer to the first question. Um, or not the first question, what shall be the sign of thy coming? The second question. Um, and all these are the
ए
beginning of
बाबु
sorrows.
चार्जर ल्याऊ त यता ल्यापटपको चार्जर
So
मेरो मोबाइल पनि ल्याऊ त
let's make sure all your mics are muted. And so all these are the beginning of sorrows. That's verse 8. And so you could interpret that as this this hasn't happened yet, or that this is the first half of the tribulation. Um, I think a common pre-tribulation interpretation is that all this is just signs leading up to the rapture, which occurs before Daniel's 70th week. So then these are not part of the 70th week, but a pre-wrath or post-trib interpretation would be that these encompass the first four seals. And then the fifth seal of Revelation, and we'll study Revelation in depth later, in later weeks, um, I got to mention it even though we haven't studied it yet. It's the fifth seal is the martyrdom of the saints. It's so it says, and so then that follows these what we see, which tie in with the fourth seal with the four seals, and then the fifth seal's martyrdom, which and then it says, then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Okay. And so there's much martyrdom going on, and we see that in Revelation where you see martyred saints crying out before God for retribution. But and the pre-trib interpretation would be these are all saints who have been converted after the rapture. Post-trib is and pre-wrath interpretation, which um, is that these are the church that has been gone through the tribulation and are being martyred and the church being purified. It says, then many shall be offended and shall betray one another and shall hate one another. And this offended is an interesting word. Um, it is so offended mean basic. It was just used prior in Matthew 13:20 through 21. An example of how it was used. It says, and it's talking about the seeds that have been scattered by the planter, and some falling on rocky ground, and some falling on good ground, some falling in stony places. It says, but he that received the seed into the stony place, the same is he that heareth the word, and anon with joy receiveth it. Yet hath he not root in himself, but dureth for a while. But for when tribulation or persecution ariseth, because of the word, by and by he is offended. And that word offended is the Greek scandalizo, which means to entrap, to trip up, to entice to sin and apostasy, and to cause to fall away. So this is applying to those who are they would have to have claimed the name of Christ at some point. Um, and whether they are actually Christians or not Christians, that also is a whole nother point of debate that can't get in. We don't have time to get into now, but basically they claim the name of Christ and they've fallen away, and many will not be able to endure this persecution and fall away and are offended. And so we and other examples of this is the use of this word is it's in Matthew. It says um, Matthew 13:55 through 57. It says, "Is not this the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brother James, Joseph, and Simon, and Judas, and his sisters, are they not here with us? Whence then has this man come?" And they were offended in him. So they were offended by Jesus, and they fell away. But Jesus said unto them, "A prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and his own house." And and the and then Jesus also uses the word offended when he's talking about what Peter will do to him. It says, "Then Jesus said unto them, All ye shall be offended because of me this night, for it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad." So that offended is the same word that the disciples running away from Christ when persecution came. So, um, so that's, I think, in the debate between pre and post, that tends to lean more toward the that Christians will be going through the tribulation, in my view, because um, you can't really fall away if you haven't been, if all the Christians have been raptured and there's some, I guess you could have some Christians who decide to be Christian but then fall away, but there's going to be continuous persecution going on. So why would, if you were afraid of persecution, why would you become a Christian in the first place? Um, so so that's one of the signs of the coming of Christ is that this people offended fall away. And it says, "And many false prophets shall arise and deceive many." Um, and because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. And in the pre-trib interpretation, all of this could still be prior to the 7 weeks of the 70th week of Daniel, but it also could be include and within the 70th week and just the persecution that occurs during the 70th week. It says, "But he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved." So who does this apply to? Those who endure to the end, because it obviously um, they're going to be saved by being with Christ. But so who's enduring to the end? Um, it could be one interpretation is this is the 144,000 in Revelation, the of 12,000 from each tribe of Israel. Um, and then, but it could also be the Christians who are going through the tribulation. It says, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." And this is basically the point where some pre-trib people think all of this applied before the rapture, and this is kind of where the rapture occurs. And after this applies to Christians. But it seems like the gospel being preached in all the world if it seems that that would be a little bit out of context to me, because this seems to be talking about the tribulation, the great tribulation, with all this persecution going and death going and martyrdom going on. So I think that there will be the gospel preached in all the world during the tribulation. So this is also interpreted as um, Jesus can't come back until the gospel goes throughout all the whole world. I've heard that preached before. I personally don't. I personally think that Jesus has his time. He's coming, or God has his time. He's coming back, and that's not going to change no matter what we do. And but the gospel will go out, and during the tribulation, and I'll get into who I think is doing the the popular pre-trib interpretation is that this all this witnessing and preaching is going on with the 144,000 Jews who come to the Lord. But I have my own ideas. I'll get into that later. It says, and when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whosoever readeth, let him understand. So now we get into definite known territory here because goes back to Daniel 9:27, and we studied this a couple weeks ago. And Daniel 9:27, it says, we'll just start at verse 26. Well, we'll go to 9. It says, and he 9:27, it says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of the abomination, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. And so we know that that is from Daniel, and that's and we know from Revelation that that's halfway through the exactly at the 3.5 year mark. It says, "Let them then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him which is in the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe to them that are with child and them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that the flight be not in the winter, neither in the Sabbath. For then shall." So this is commonly interpreted uh, as a prophecy for 70 AD when the temple is destroyed and warning Christians to flee the city when the army arrives. But one, and it could have some application to that, and no doubt that some interpreted it as that and did flee the city when they saw the Romans arrive. But then in verse 21 it says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." So that ties it to the great tribulation, because as bad as the what happened in 70 AD in Jerusalem it wasn't it's definitely going to be surpassed by the great tribulation. So it says, it such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. That could only apply to the great tribulation. So this to me would apply to the great tribulation. But since it's very specific and how it talks to about Judah and Jerusalem, Judea, I think this would apply to Jews in Jerusalem during the Great Tribulation. And so it's warning them to flee the city. And so if and here's how I specifically think of it. Let's go to Revelation 12. So this Revelation 12 talks about the woman who, when we studied Isaiah, we looked at this verse and I'm pretty sure that this woman represents Israel and the people of Israel because, for one, the woman's clothed with the sun and the moon and 12 stars, and her head is crowned with 12 stars, and that goes back to Joseph's dream of the moon and the sun and the moon and the stars bowing to him, and so those symbols uh, represent Israel. And so, and the woman, and then the woman delivers a child, which I think is Christ because it's taken up to heaven, and it says in verse 5, it says it rule all nations to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and that's specifically Christ. Only he does that. But if we go to Revelation 12:11, it says, and this is the Satan's been cast down and he's persecuting the uh the woman. He's trying to persecute the woman. Let's see. And it says, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testimony, and they loved not their lives to death. So, um, so that I think is the Christ persecuting the saints during the tribulation. I think that, and if you go back to, and this is why the same Matthew 24 is gone over in Mark 13 and Luke 21. So you can't just study one because there's details in the different ones that you got to go back and look at. So if you go to Mark 13, 9 through 11, it says, take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver. And this is the same Olivet discourse that we're going talking about in Matthew 24. It says, but take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver you up to councils and in the synagogues, and ye shall be beaten, and ye shall be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them. And so this is talking about what in Matthew 24 it says they shall kill you, and others, and it talks about this tribulation again that's going on and martyrdom. And then it says, and the gospel must first be published among all nations, but when they shall lead you to deliver you up. So basically, it's talking about persecution. And in the middle of it, it says, and the gospel must first be published among all nations. But when they shall lead you and deliver you up, take no heed. So now it's still talking about persecution. Um, take no thought beforehand what ye shall speak, neither do ye premeditate whatsoever shall be given you in that hour that speak ye, for it is not ye that speak, but the Holy Ghost. So basically, I think this, because it's talking about persecution and martyrdom before and after, it brackets and the gospel must first be published among all nations. I think that demonstrates how the gospel is going to be spread among all nations. It's going to be through the the trials of the saints when they're drugged before the leaders and their witness before they are killed, and the Holy Spirit will speak through them. So the Holy Spirit is going to be using this martyrdom of the saints during the tribulation to spread the gospel throughout the earth. And what a powerful testimony that is to stand with God when you know you're going to die and you know your wife and children are going to die. So, but it says the Holy Spirit himself will speak through you at that time. Um, so I think this is they who overcame him in Revelation 12, verse 11, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. So I think that ties in with these verses that talk about spreading the gospel and also talk about martyrdom. And then there's some also some symbols in this. It says, therefore rejoice, next in verse 12, Revelations 12:12, therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, and having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And that goes back to say Mark 13:20, where it says, um, talks about the days being shortened. It says, except the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved. But for the elect's sake, whom he has chosen, he hath shortened the days. So the days have been shortened. So that's, and then it says, and when the dragon saw that he was cast upon the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the child. And and that ties in, that kind of ties in with Mark 17, Mark 13:17. It says, but woe to them that are with child and to them that give suck in those days. So it's talking about um women with child in it, and that here he's persecuting the woman with the child. And then it says, and the woman were given two wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness. And then in verse 21, right after that, it says, I mean, in verse Mark 13:18, it says, Mark 13:18, right after it says, and pray ye that your flight be not in the winter. So it's using the same verb of flight. So I don't know. I just that may be nothing, but I thought that was interesting that they use the same when it's talking about the woman fleeing into the desert. They're using the same verbs at this time, of and the same characters, and it's also the same time period because this woman, it's specifically says in verse Revelations 12:6, it says, and the woman fled into the wilderness where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days, which we looked at is the prophetic year is 360 days, and that's you divide 1,260, but divide by 360, that's exactly 3.5 years. So and so the we also see that that's exactly the time period we're talking about here, where it talks about the abomination of desolation, and then to flee, because and so perhaps these people who are fleeing in these verses are is the woman who's fleeing, and God will send two angels and fly them into the wilderness. Um, so you can that's certainly not a traditional interpretation of that, but that's something that I feel like was shown to me this week. And but there there are many other interpretations of those verses because they're difficult to understand. So we'll go back to Matthew 24. We left off at verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. When ye foresee the abomination, desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Um, it says, then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. Let them which be on the housetop not come down to take anything out of the house. And let him which is in the field return. Let him which is in the field return to take his clothes. So he's saying, don't go back. And if this is the people who are if this is the woman who is being flown by the two eagles, flown with eagle's wings to the wilderness for protection. We read in Isaiah pretty detailed account of how Israel will be provided for in the wilderness. And we'll get into that in other weeks about Israel's specific role in the tribulation. But I think there's Israel will be provided for in the wilderness, just like he provided for Israel in the wilderness in the days of Moses. So they don't need anything. So they don't go back because you're wasting your time. Get out of there and find the rescue that God has prepared for you. It says, but pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. So, um, yeah, I don't know why it would this makes it indicate that it's specific to the Jew because of the mention of the Sabbath day, which would corroborate the theory that this is the woman being rescued at the 3.5 year mark. For then shall, but the winter part, the only interpretation, if she is literally flying to the wilderness, in some mechanism or other. I know when I was in the military, I've taken helicopter flights at night, and you don't want to take a helicopter flight in the winter. So it's very, very cold. So if you are literally flying it, you want to pray that it's not in the winter. So that's probably not the proper interpretation, but that's just what comes to mind. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. All right, so, and then it goes on, and except those days be shortened, there shall be no flesh saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So, who are the elect? Um, let's look at that. So, the pre-trib interpretation of those days be shortened. The elect would be Christians, and so the rapture would be pushed forward to shorten the days that Christians have to be on this earth. But um, I think that the elect are primarily Israel, and and uh, and the Jews are being killed like crazy at this time period. Remember, we read last week that in Zechariah it described 2/3 of the Jews being killed during this time, and so I think it's for their sake. And so if you look at Isaiah 45:4, it says, "For Jacob my servant and Israel mine elect, I have even called thee by thy name. I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me." So he calls Israel his elect in those verses. And then Isaiah, and that was Isaiah 45:4. And then Isaiah 65:8-9, it says, "Thus saith the Lord, as the new wine is found in the clusters, one saith, destroy it not, for a blessing is in it. So will I do for my servant's sake, that I may not destroy them all. And I will bring forth a seed out of Jacob and out of Judah, an inheritor of my mountains, and mine elect shall inherit it, and my servant shall dwell there." So that's specifically talking about Israel in the end times inheriting the land. And so this applies. They are the elect. And it goes on in Isaiah 65, 21-23. It says, "And they shall build houses and inhabit them, then shall plant vineyards and eat the fruit." And I think this is talking about the time of the millennial reign. "And they shall not build and another inhabit, they shall not plant and another eat. For as the days of a tree are the days of my people, and mine elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands." So there again, he calls them his elect. Um, Christians are also called the elect in the Bible. It says in Romans 8:33, who shall lay anything to the charge of God's elect? It is God that justifies. So Christians are also his elect. And and so it also says in Colossians 3:11, uh, where there where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all in all. Put on therefore as the elect of God, holy and beloved, bowels of mercy, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, and long-suffering. So it's again calling Christians the elect of God. But Jews are also the elect of God, and they're the ones who are being killed at this time. And Christians are also being killed, but if a Christian is killed, they have new life. They're they don't have to the shortening the time doesn't necessarily save the Christian because the Christian's going to be saved either way. But shortening the time does um, allow more Jews to survive and to recognize their Messiah when he comes. All right, so let's go on. It says in Matthew 24:23, then if any man say unto you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. So, um, so this could apply to Christian if Christians are in the tribulation, and that Christians are the elect as well, then the there's going to be false Christ like the Antichrist himself who'll be so appealing that it will even tempt Christians to follow him. But because God does hold us in his hand, it's as if it were possible. Uh, God won't allow us to be deceived. So so the Antichrist is going to be an appealing person for a while, and those who if Christians do go through the tribulation, or even those who are not Christian, it'll be a great temptation to follow him because he'll be appealing, but then if you don't follow him, there's death and destruction awaiting you. So it's sort of the carrot and the stick um where if you have a reward and pleasure for doing something and punishment for not doing something, the vast majority of people will choose to go do the pleasurable thing. And that will include taking the mark of the beast, which Revelation is clear. If you take, you are not going to be in the king. You'll suffer judgment, and you won't be in the kingdom. It says, wherefore, if they say unto you, behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. For as lightning cometh out of the east and shineth unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So you're not going to have to go look for Jesus during the tribulation. When he comes, you will know it. It says, for wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. And that verse um, is also mentioned in um, Luke. That's difficult to understand in that context. I think it's Luke. It could be Mark. Let me look. Um, let's go to. Okay, it's actually in Luke. and this Olivet discourse in Luke is actually broken up, and what's all in Matthew 24, part of it is in Luke 21, and then part is in Luke 17. And so and and the order changes. So in Matthew 24, well, it add, Mark they add a little bit more information here. It says in Luke 17, starting in uh verse 34. Well, we'll just go to 31 because it 31 is where it kind of ties in with what we were just reading in Matthew 24. It says, "In that day, he which shall be upon the housetop and his stuff in the house, let him not come down to take it away. And he that is in the field likewise not return back." And we just read about that. It says, "Remember Lot's wife." So that's not mentioned in Matthew 24. So it's saying if you turn back, you're not going to be saved, just like Lot's wife wasn't. And whosoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it, and whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. So he's telling those Jews that uh, you just have to flee with nothing, and if you expect to be saved, and you have to trust God that He will provide, and He will. It says, "I tell you, in that night there shall be two men in one bed; one shall be taken, the other left." And this is the same night that this is all occurring. It says, "And two women shall be grinding together; the one shall be taken, the other left. Two men shall be in the field; the one taken, the other left." And this is not this is an addition that we don't see in Matthew. It says, "And they answered and said unto him, Where, Lord?" He's saying, where are they going to be taken to? And it says, "And he said unto them, Wheresoever the body is, thither will the eagles be gathered together." So so he's saying, so the disciples here are asking, where are these people being taken? And and he gives an answer that um and that would not indicate a rapture. Like some people interpret these verses to be the rapture, but that doesn't sound like the rapture to me. When they say where they be taken, it says where the body is, there the eagles would be gathered, and the eagles, um, you know, it's it kind of gives a sense, a view of like a bird chewing on a dead body. So like if we go, that's also mentioned in Revelation 19 verses. If you go back to Revelation 19:17, it says in Revelation 19:17 it says, "And I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried with a loud voice, saying to all the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven, Come and eat and gather yourselves together at the supper of the great God." So this is at the end of the Battle of Armageddon, and this massive army has been destroyed, and God's calling all the birds of the earth to come and feed on this army. And this, remember, this army was an army of 200 million, it says in Revelation. We'll get to we'll get to that when we study Revelation, but and then it says in Revelation 19:21 it says, "And the remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat on the horse, which sword proceedeth out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh." So there's going to be this massive flock of birds that devour the flesh of the dead in the day of the Lord. And um, so if so some will be left to be fed on by these birds, and some won't. So, and that's just I think just maybe God just deciding who he should punish and who shouldn't, who should, because we do know that some will survive the apocalypse because we read that. I think it's in other verses that we studied earlier. It said like a sixth of Magog would survive, and some nations would survive. But we read that earlier. But so there will be some survivors, and maybe this is the division between the survivors and those that die. So that's a little more detail about that one verse in Matthew 24 that is difficult to understand. All right. It says, "Watch therefore." This is Matthew 24, verse 42. Um, well, let's go back. Um, let's go back to where we left off. All right, so I think we left off at verse 28. For whosoever the carcass is, there would the eagles be gathered. And we looked at more detail given in Luke about that. It says, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. All right, so last week we went into depth looking at this sun and moon being darkened and as an indicator of the day of the Lord. So perhaps this is the same day of the Lord, the final day of the tribulation. And it says immediately after the tribulation. So the tribulation is the great Jesus calls it the great tribulation here. This it could be interpreted as a tribulation against Christians, and because at this point um it's we're after it, but we're still in the day of now it's the day of the Lord. So now it's no longer a tribulation against Christians. Now it's a wrath of God falling out upon the ungodly. And so um and what's interesting is at this point they kind of change their um who they're talking about, because everything before this it says it's talking about you. And in Mark, you look at Mark 13 when it says who's the audience, it's Peter, James, John, and Andrew. The other chapters don't specify that, but Mark 13 does. It says at the beginning of Mark 13 it says specifically in Mark 13:3 it says, and they sat down upon the Mount of Olives over against the temple, and Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately. So it was a private conversation between those four. And he's telling them, you. And so to me, that's because of who he's addressing it to. To me, that's a more leans more toward a post-trib interpretation of this Matthew 24, um because it's kind of difficult to have them address you and not think that they're addressing Christians, because like just a few chapters prior that Jesus said, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build the church." He's already designated Peter the leader of the church, and he's telling Peter, "You." So I don't know how this couldn't apply to the church, but when you get to the wrath, it changes to they, and like in Mark 13:26. It's the whole chapter talks about talking to you, and then it says, and then Mark 13:26 it says, and then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And so, um, and I think the same thing occurs in Matthew. But so so at this point, there could be this is now the last day if it's when you're talking about the sun not giving the sun not being darkened and the moon shall not give her light. And that goes back to Zechariah 14:7, where it talks about um, in Zechariah 14:7. It says, but it shall be one day which shall be known to the Lord, not day nor night, but it shall come to pass that at evening time it shall be light. So there's gonna be this darkness, but when Christ comes, the light will come. So the sun that will be the day when the sun and the moon don't shine, and that's the day of the Lord. And it says, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light. The stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And and those are the same imagings we see in Revelation at the day of the Lord and in Zechariah. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in clouds, in the power of heaven, in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And so this is tying to Zechariah 12:10 is what talks about. It says in Zechariah 12:10 it says, and I will pour upon the house of David and upon the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and of supplication, and they shall look upon me whom they have pierced, and they shall mourn for him as one mourneth for his only son, and shall be in bitterness for him as one is bitterness for his firstborn. So this mourning, we saw in Zechariah, it says all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven. And that goes back to First Thessalonians 4:16-7. We also see Christ coming in clouds. First Thessalonians 4, or actually, yeah. It says in First Thessalonians 4:16-7, it says, for the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. So it talks about the Lord coming in clouds. I know these verses are commonly interpreted as the pre-tribulation rapture, but it fits pretty nicely here with the clouds and rising be with the Lord. It says he shall gather his elect from the four winds from one end of heaven to the other. So who are these elect that he's gathering? Um, if there was a pre-tribulation rapture, um, I guess it could just be the Christians that came to the Lord after the rapture, but it could also be Christians who went through the rapture. Um, and this whole concept of the dead rising first that we read in First Thessalonians. Um, and we saw in this day of darkness in Zechariah, we saw that this was the day of the Lord, the final day. And we see the term last day used in John a lot. It says in John 6:39 through 40, it says, "And this is the Father's will which hath sent me, that of all which he hath given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up at the last day." So he says the last day, and this is the will of him that sent me, and everyone which seeth the Son and believeth on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. And then in John 6:44, a few verses later, it says, "No man can come unto me except the Father which hath sent me draw him, and I will raise him up at the last day." And then in John 11:23 through 26, it says, "Jesus saith unto her, Thy brother," this is talking about Lazarus, says, "Thy brother shall rise again. And Martha said unto him, I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, he shall live." All right, so the term last day, Jesus himself uses the term last day in application to the resurrection. And in this case, that resurrection applies to Lazarus, and Lazarus certainly wouldn't be part of the Christians who came to Christ during the tribulation. So that would apply. So, and then we also see in the Thessalonians that we just read that the dead in Christ rise first. So if Lazarus is dead and he's risen at the last day, then um, then we which are alive will rise after the dead. So those are verses that tend toward more of a post-trib, um, pre-wrath interpretation. All right, so in Matthew 32 or Matthew 24:32, it says, "Now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that the summer is nigh." So these are one of these things when interpreting Bible, and they just kind of throw this random thing out there. It's probably pretty important because um, they they just don't throw little symbols like that out there for no reason. So just just a couple days prior, when Jesus was walking into Jerusalem, he cursed a fig tree, and he went to the fig tree and saw that it had no fruit, and so he cursed it. And then they walked by later and they saw it was dead. So we can read about that. It's in Mark 11:12 through 14, it says, "And on the morrow, when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry. And seeing a fig tree afar off having leaves, he came if haply he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. And Jesus answered, it says, and Jesus answered and said unto them, No man eat fruit of thee hereafter forever. And his disciples heard it." So I always thought this was interesting because it says, I mean, Mark gives us the detail that it wasn't even time for the figs. So I thought that was a little unfair. When I've read this, I've always thought that's a little bit unfair for Jesus to curse this fig tree when it's not the season for figs. But I think I think this is a representation. Um, it's, it says, and then it says later, and it goes, and in the morning they passed by and they saw the fig tree dried from the roots. And this is in 11:20. And to remembrance, saith unto him, Master, behold, the fig tree which thou cursest is withered. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Have faith in God. Verily I say unto you that whosoever shall say to this mountain, Be thou removed and cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe those things which he has said shall come to pass, he, he shall have whatsoever he saith. So he's using an example of faith, but I think it's also a symbol um, for Israel because um, we see Israel being compared to figs in the Bible, and especially in Jeremiah 24. In Jeremiah 24, it says, The Lord showed me, and behold, two baskets of figs were set before the temple of the Lord. After that, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away captive Jeconiah, son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and the princes of Judah with the carpenters and the smiths from Jerusalem, and had brought them to Babylon. One basket had very good figs, even like the figs that are first ripe. Another basket had very naughty figs, which could not be eaten. They were so bad. So he's comparing, he goes on comparing the Israel to figs, good figs and bad figs. And then in Hosea 9:10 says, I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your fathers as the first stripe in the fig tree at her first time. So Israel is compared to figs. So when so when he curses the fig tree, I think I think it's because Christ has rejected that he has cursed Israel as a nation, and they'll be going to be destroyed and scattered. And so they're the whole Mosaic uh, structure is is basically um, going to be fall away. The old covenant is going to fall away, and there's going to be a new covenant. And so when it says in Matthew, it says, where are we at? Now learn the parable of the fig tree when his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, know that summer is nigh. So if how will we see the fig tree tender? Well, we've seen Israel come together as a nation again. And so it's like a new sprout of a nation. So when you see Israel, so we've seen Israel, the fig, sprout again and his branch is tender, then know that he's nigh. And so Israel has now been a nation for over 70 years. So, um, so know that the time is nigh, and I think that right there is a big sign of his coming, because that's the question he's answering here. What's the sign of your coming, and when shall these things be? It says, so likewise, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. So that goes back to the disciples' question of in verse 3. It says, tell us, when shall these things be? And so that's answering that question right there. And he's already given us a lot of signs of his coming. It says, verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. And so that verse right there is is what a lot of amillennialists or all millennialists latch onto, because they think, well, when that generation, uh, some who are alive in that day experienced the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and so that was the fulfillment of all of Matthew 24, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so they don't believe that. They believe that we either are in the millennial reign right now, or there isn't one. And so but that goes to how your interpretation of that generation. Um, so it could be generation could have a more broad interpretation as like the generation of the nation of Israel. Like the nation of Israel will not pass away, and we've seen Israel being miraculously preserved through all history when all other nations and empires have been destroyed. Israel has hung on to its culture and its religion. So, and they've been preserved up to these last days. So it's saying, perhaps it's saying Israel won't be destroyed until all these things are taking place. Or it could mean that all these events in the last days will take place within a generation. It's not going to be strung out over centuries. So that's that right there's one of the more difficult verses to interpret, but uh, but it has caused a lot of confusion. It says, "Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away." And it says, "But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only." So it says specifically you can't know the day or the hour, and but it says it doesn't say season or years. It says you shouldn't be surprised. You should know it's coming. You can't know it down to the exact day, but you know it's coming. It says, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of man be." So Noah didn't know the day or the hour, but he knew the flood was coming. He believed it enough to build a massive boat. Noah wasn't too surprised when it started to rain. It says, "For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, and given in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark." And so Noah, no, when Noah entered the ark, it actually didn't rain for 7 days. He was in the ark for 7 days before it rained. You can read that back in Genesis. But so Noah didn't know the day or the hour, but he knew enough to get in the boat, and he was pretty sure when all the animals showed up that something was about to happen. Um, so I don't think that just because it says we should not know the day or the hour, I don't think that means we we have no idea when this is happening, because there's so much in here that says it's coming very, very soon. Um, like we talked about yesterday, the church fathers, Irenaeus, they thought, hey, I think it's coming 1800 years from now. That was their belief. I don't think anyone today is saying, I think it's coming 1800 years from now. I think anyone who's in tune with the Spirit and in tune with the Word believes it's coming very, very, very soon. And so just because it says you don't know the day and the hour doesn't mean you should just write off even thinking about it, because it's coming. And it says, "And they knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the man be. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be." It says, "And then shall two be in the field, and one shall be taken and the other left." And we already looked at these verses in Luke, I think. And two women shall be grinding in the mill, one taken and the other left. And this taken, and some interpret this as the rapture, but you can see in context that this wouldn't be the rapture, because it falls after all this, after the day of the Lord. And it says, and it's used the words taken, and it's comparing it to the days of Noah. And it says, "And they knew not when the flood came and took them all away." So the verb take is used for those who were killed in the flood. And now they're using and then it says, and two shall be in the field, and one taken and the other left. So that, to me, that doesn't apply to the rapture, especially when you compare it to the verses we read where it says, "Where, Lord?" Where the disciples ask, "Where, Lord?" And then he says, where the eagles gather, where the body is, there the eagles will be gathered. So that that is indicative of death. So the taken is not a good thing in this, I believe. Um, it says, "Watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord doth come." So it says you don't know the hour, but you're supposed to watch and supposed to try to figure it out. But Lord, this is this that if the good men of the house had known at what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore, be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not the Son of Man cometh, you think not the Son of Man cometh. Who then is a faithful and wise servant, who his Lord hath made ruler over his house to give them meat in due season? Blessed is that man whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. So he's saying we should be watching for the Lord's coming, and we should be looking at for the signs, and that's what we're doing today. So it says, "Verily, I say to you that he shall make him ruler over all his goods. But if that evil servant shall say in his heart, My Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to smite his fellow servants, and to eat and drink with the drunken, the Lord of that servant shall come in a day when he looketh not for him, and in an hour when he is not aware, and shall cut him asunder and appoint him a portion with the hypocrites, and there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So that's a pretty dire warning right there. And I think that, so if the church is asked to go through the tribulation, then this doctrine of pre if you if the church goes through and you have the doctrine of pre-tribulation, and you start getting into the throes of the tribulation with the Antichrist and all that, um, it it could work toward deception, because um, if you believe honestly in your heart that you will not ever experience Daniel's 70th week, and you expect to be raptured before anything bad happens, then when you see the Antichrist come and he looks good, you might be tempted to follow him, because you think that this is not the Antichrist, because the Antichrist is only comes during the tribulation and we can't be in the tribulation. So that could be so that you could see an understanding of these scriptures, or a misunderstanding of these scriptures, could be detrimental to, or could be part of you being led to um, follow a false doctrine and all these deceptive false prophets and all that going on. So especially if you're in a church where you're not even a good portion of the church today, I believe, uh, is not really are not really Christ servants. They're just using religion for their own purposes. So if you're part of that crowd, that's someone who's definitely prey to the Antichrist. And if they start following the Antichrist agenda, then it says they could turn on other Christians, the true Christians, because um, it says it says, "Oh, the late is coming. He begins to smite his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunken." And so, in the days of the Antichrist, sin will be normalized, just as it is much so today, but even more so then. It'll be the days Isaiah describes, where light becomes darkness, darkness becomes light, good evil, evil good. Um, so there'll be incentive to be immoral and and to persecute those who are not following Christ. And we're already seeing that in our own day. So, um, to greater degrees in other places than others, but it's already happening. But those will be um, th those who claim the name of Christ and who follow the Antichrist agenda during those days will be under much greater punishment, I believe. It says he shall cut him asunder and appoint him a portion with the hypocrites, so there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So, so that's Jesus answering the disciples' questions of it says, "Tell us when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of the coming and the end of the world?" And so the let's actually look at those questions in the other chapters. In Mark 13, at Mark 13, it says in verse uh 3, it says, "And he sat upon the Mount of Olives over against the temple, and Peter, James, and John, and Andrew asked him privately, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled?" So he changed it. It's different than what they have in Matthew a little bit. And in Matthew, you can kind of break that up into the last question into two questions. What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? But here in Mark 13, it says, Tell us when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled? So that can't be broken up. That's definitely two questions. In Luke 21, it says, um, in verse 7, it says, Luke 21:7, it says, And they asked him, saying, Master, but when shall these things be? And what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? So that's definitely two questions, not three. So, um, so if you to you cannot have a pre-tribulation interpretation and have this be two questions in Matthew 24:3, because it says, what should what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? Um, because in the pre-tribulation interpretation, those are two totally separate events, separated by 7 years. So you have to break that up into two questions. But uh, that's impossible to do in these in Luke and Mark. It's two questions. So you, to me, I think it was two questions asked, and so this you'd have to interpret this last one, what shall be the sign of the coming and of the end of the world, as one question. So, then the sign of the coming would have to be at the end of the world, the final day of the Lord. Um, which I think we've seen that um, it's easier, things fit better when you place it that way, especially with verse 30, where it talks about um, Jesus coming in the clouds with the power of great glory. Um, and that's also tied in with the day of darkened when the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall not give her light. So, because we've already went into detail last week how the sun and the moon tie to the very last day, the day of the Lord. So all of it discourse goes on into for another chapter. So it's And these in this chapter of the first of all, let me ask if anyone has any questions before we move on. There's got to be questions. That's just some of the most difficult passages in the Bible. It's warming up. Who's got questions?
Yeah, I have one question.
All right. What you
Yeah,
got?
yeah. In this, I was listening. It was really good, interesting. So I had a one question: whether God is still on the way to fulfill the rest of the promise to the Israel, or God has already finished all the promises that He's supposed to fulfilled on behalf of Israelites.
No, there's almost all the promises of God to Israel have not been fully fulfilled yet. Uh, it'll most they'll be fulfilled during the millennial kingdom. So God, what you're kind of referring to is called replacement theology, where the where where Christians will say God's done with Israel. They rejected him. They're no longer they're no longer special to God, and all the promises that were given to Israel are now belong to the church. And that's not that's not I believe that's not tenable in your interpretation of scripture because there's so much that is specifically toward Israel that is Christians have their own that will have their own promises and their own uh, and it's probably even going to be even better. But Israel as a nation will have uh, a fulfillment of their promises in the millennial kingdom. So, so for instance, when God promised Abraham that his descendants would inherit from the Nile River to the Euphrates River, that hasn't happened yet, but it will, and that's the land that Israel will inhabit during the millennial kingdom. So, so if I think you might have heard some what's called replacement theology, and so I think that's bad theology, and it's actually kind of dangerous theology because it leads to anti-Semitism, and and it's there's Christians and conservative people who are anti-Semitic because they subscribe to this theology, and I think it's bad doctrine. And we'll get more into I plan on having a whole lesson devoted to what Israel what promises Israel has, how what Israel is to expect in the millennial kingdom. That'll probably be after the holidays. Because the way I'm doing this class is basically before the holidays, I'm having all the tribulation up until Christ's coming, and then after that, I'm going to talk about the millennial kingdom, what heaven's going to be like. So, so we'll get more into that. Good question though. Anybody else? Anybody else? Come on. I know somebody's got a question.
Uh,
Yes, sir, Jameson.
uh, Dr. Chris, you mentioned about First Thessalonians chapter 4
Right.
for the second coming of Christ. Mm, but that content is second coming or rapture. What should we? I just we are just presenting First Thessalonians chapter 4 always for the rapture of
Right.
believers.
It is the rapture.
So, is it okay to rapture and second coming? There is differ, no? Both
Well, that's
events
what
will be different. So,
that is
should
that is a
should
common
we?
interpretation, and that's the interpretation I was taught. I'm sure you were taught that they're different, that the Lord, there's the rapture pre-tribulation, and then there's the uh Christ coming at the end of the rapture. And that's a common interpretation, and that's probably an interpretation that you have and a lot of people have. I just but I think there is I and most people, especially Baptists, are very dogmatic about that. But I don't think they really can be, because if you study the scriptures. And so I think there's also a case to be made for them being the same event. So, and that's what I explained a lot of that in what we just went over. But if the only difference would be that Christians have to are go through the tribulation. And there's many, many verses that talk about the benefits of purifying the church. And we saw in Daniel that it's the whole purpose of the tribulation is to purify and to purge. So let's go back to Daniel. Let me see if I can find that. It says but so yeah, I'd have to get back with you on that, but it's the whole it sucks. There's in many places. I have a whole presentation on this. I went over it before in Isaiah, but it's there there is a case to be made for the church going through the tribulation and the church being purified and made white, is how Daniel describes it. And we'll get into that in Revelation as well. But if that's the case, then what you mentioned, First Thessalonians 4:16 through 17, would be both the rapture and the second coming of Christ, the same event. But yeah, that does refer to the rapture. But like we saw in Matthew 24, it kind of sounds like the same when you're talking about the dead rising to the clouds. Let's go back and look at Matthew 24. It says, and he shall send his angels in Matthew 24:31. It says, and he shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. So, okay. And it says in verse 30, it says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So this whole sign of clouds, where it says in verse 17 of First Thessalonians 4:17, and then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds. So it's the same terminology, and those kind of details aren't just thrown out randomly. Like, they put them in there for on purpose to help you understand. But yeah, you wouldn't be you would be following traditional interpretation, at least for the last 100 years or 150 years of that if you separated the two. But it is that would be a pre-tribulation interpretation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, almost I do them, but it's I just remembering about the biblical based on the both events is different. So, but some similarities with in the both events, like
Yeah.
coming Christ, uh, rapture. During rapture, we see the Jesus coming in the cloud. But in the
Right.
events, second coming will come. Jesus will come in the earth. So that is the different parts. But cloud is a same kind. Trumpet also same. So some some things will be the same, but many things will be different. So I just want to make some, context. Con-
Yeah.
Context is king. Yeah. Thank you. That's good. I agree. I agree about that. Uh, interpretation can be both. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I'm I personally am kind of leaning toward the day of the Lord being at the end with the church going through the tribulation. But I was raised and taught that they were separate, and it's only when I got into the scriptures and started studying the details did I decide that they were the same, because it just made more sense. The Do you know the history of the interpretation of pre-tribulation? It actually wasn't until like the I think it was around the 1870s. A guy named Darby was a big proponent of it, and then it was a and it was basically a doctrine that was created at that time, and really it had no before that. The early church fathers basically believed that the two were the same. When Christ returns at the end of the millennial, it would be the rapture would be at the end of the tribulation. That's what the early church fathers believed. Um, the church kind of got away from that for like 1,000 years during the Middle Ages and all that, and really wasn't thought about. They kind of got into amillennialism, where they really didn't talk about the rapture too much, and they just thought that Christ would return and claim his kingdom that here on earth that became basically we're already in the millennial kingdom. And once the world improved enough to that Christ would just come and take control. But but then in the 1870s, that's when the whole concept of the pre-tribulation rapture came about. So it's fairly new doctrine as far as the history of the church goes. But in evangelical churches, it's very much accepted, and I hope it's true. But I kind of believe in hope for the worst, or hope for the best, prepare for the worst. So I think that there's enough scripture that says that the church will go through the tribulation, that I personally want to prepare myself and those around me mentally to go through and spiritually to go through the tribulation. Otherwise, you might be subject to deception that we read about and that will occur among Christians during the tribulation. Because the very first thing he says in Matthew 24 is, "Do not be deceived," when he's talking about the tribulation. So
Yeah, but
it's a
yeah,
big.
but if church will go through the tribulation, there will be so many questions will be raised. So immediately, if there is a second coming and rapture is both same time occurred, that will be how possible Jesus will come with us in the second coming, or how we uh, uh, mm, rule with Jesus in the 1,000 years. So who will be the rulers? For 12 disciples will rule for the Jews.
Well, then
So
it.
so many questions will be raised.
Yeah. I mean, I think that
What about that? All
I
things.
believe Christians will be on the earth during the millennial kingdom and rule with Christ. But the rapture, and if it's a post-tribulation context, it's basically you rise to meet Christ and then come right back down, like basically the same day. That's the post-tribulation interpretation. But the so the pre-tribulation would be you go and you're with Christ for 7 years and then you come with him. But post-tribulation you still have a rapture, but it's you come right back down. And that's if you look at, let's go to Mark 13. All through all through the whole chapter, it says it's referring to you, or ye, King James. But then, but then, when it talks about Christ coming in the power, like in verse 26, it says, and then it says, they see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. So if it's you, Christians, you, and then all of a sudden it's they, perhaps the rapture occurred before that. So it says, so all these calamities it's talking about, if the church is going through this, but it says in verse 24, it says in Mark 13:24, it says, but in those days after that tribulation, so now the tribulation's over. So because perhaps Christians have been raptured now, and there's no tribulation on the Christians anymore. But it says the sun will be darkened and the moon shall not give her light and the stars of heaven shall fall. Powers. So now these are the events that we read about in Zechariah and Joel, the day of the Lord, the sun and the moon being darkened. And says, and now this is the first time it says they, and it says in verse 26, and then they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power. So this is no longer you, it's they. So he doesn't say, and you shall see the Son of Man coming, because you're with Christ. So um so that could be the point right before the day of the Lord, that the rapture occurs. Do you have any scriptures that would back up the Christ coming on before the tribulation? The
Yeah, I believe that before the tribulation, rapture will be occurred. and 7, or that will be the two views about rapture: mid tribulation or pre tribulation. So I just there is so many verses are speaking about the mm pre tribulation. So I just mentioning about these all things to you. So
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to hear those verses. We can be a good project.
yeah, that is I just after Revelation chapter 3, we cannot see the church are there. Uh, verse 4 says, then after there is another events will happen. So Revelation chapter 3 clearly says there is no church during tribulation, because after chapter 3 there we cannot see the church. So all chapter 4, after chapter 4 revelation, there will be the all events will be the for the tribulation. So yeah, some are there is we can translate about other events also in the after chapter 4, Revelation chapter 4. But uh, we cannot see after chapter 4, Revelation chapter 4, there is no any mention about the church. So church is not there in the tribulation. So tribulation will be the 7 years. That 7 years is a very short time. That is the Daniel speak about the 70 weeks. So 70 weeks is 69 weeks almost finished after death of Christ during 33 AD. There will be the 69 weeks. So now is only remaining 7 days. That is the we say Bible speak about that will be the tribulation week.
I see
So
I see the church in I see perhaps I see the church in Revelation 6:11. It says and white robes were given unto every one of them, and it was said unto them that they should rest yet a little season until their fellow servants and their brethren that should be killed, as they were, should be fulfilled. So their fellow brethren were killed, and there's more being killed.
all that
That could
all that during the tribulation. During tribulation, there will be the believers of Christ, but not church.
that's
Because tribulation, when after finish the rapture, there will be so many people will believe in Jesus because they see Jesus in the cloud. So whoever see
Yeah,
in the
here,
cloud, they will believe.
Pastor, here that the rapture is the purpose that for the church to taken away before the punishment of the tribulation is happen. So according to the Ephesians, according to the Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, the church is the bride of Jesus, and the object and the subject of Christ is to love the church, so that if the church goes through the tribulations, it will be contradicted in the subject of Christ's love to the church. So there are so many scriptures indicated that the Christ, the church will not go through the tribulations. Likely we say that Thessalonica chapter 4, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 to 17, that the church will not go. And even then in John chapter 14, verses 1 to 3, that the church are exposed, and then the Lord Jesus Christ will come and receive to the church, and where that Christ was, that the church also would be there. So it is very clear and Romans chapter 8, verse 1, and First Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 9, that the church will not go through the wrath of God. The tribulation is for the purpose of that to give the punishment for the Jews. But the church is the bride of Jesus, so that the church must be removed before the tribulations. And then the church must be spent with Christ, while that on the earth release for the 7 years of the tribulation, the church would be spent with Christ in heaven. That's to be reward them, to the church. Whatsoever that the church has done, so all that to reward to them, so that the church will be with Christ for 7 years here, and the expirations of the 7 years for the tribulations, for the second coming, the church and the Christ will come back together for second coming. That's all.
All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Well, I'm glad we got some good debate in. We got to look into what we believe. So
This is the very debating topics. Eschatology always, So
Yeah.
we believe whenever we discuss, we can make some good understanding about the biblical aspect. So thank you. Yeah,
I'm
thank you,
going to
thank you,
thank
Pastor.
you.
Yeah.
I'll put together some thoughts on the subject, and we'll discuss it next week. So be prepared.
It's really interesting. Really interesting.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. We love this. Thank you, Chris.
All right. I think we're out of time, so I'll close us in prayer.
Oh, yes, sir.
Lord, thank you for this time together and to look at your word and try to interpret what you have revealed to us. Thank you that you're coming soon, and however you do it in your own way, we look forward to all spending eternity with you. Please help prepare our hearts and minds for the things that are coming, and help us to bring a great harvest into your kingdom. Thank you, Lord, for giving health to these men and women. And please put those people in front of us who we can share your word and bring a great harvest for you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.